The titanium door of the refresher unit groaned under the weight of my fist, a sound that echoed through the cramped, vibrating hull of the Void Jumper. It was a rhythmic, desperate thud that probably sounded like a death knell to the woman inside. "Kyra, open the door," I shouted, leaning my forehead against the cold metal. The ship took a heavy hit to the starboard stabilizers, and the floor tilted at a sickening 15-degree angle. Red emergency lights bathed the corridor in a hue that looked suspiciously like spilled blood. "We have exactly 4 minutes before the security drones breach the airlock, and I'd really prefer not to be KIA because you're having a crisis of faith in my dietary habits." "Get away from me, you monster!" Her voice came through the vents, thin and trembling like a frayed wire. "I know what you do. I saw the archives. You're just waiting for me to fall asleep so you can start with the fingers, aren't you?" I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly saw my own brain. "For the 100th time, Kyra, I don't eat wives. I don't eat husbands. I don't even eat my subordinates unless they're incredibly well marinated, and even then, only on holidays." It was a joke. A dark, cynical, very human joke that the media turned into a galactic horror story. "Liars always say they're joking," she spat back. "You won me in a life-stake game. Why else would a human risk 20 years of his vitality for an Aetherian female if not to supplement his own protein intake?" The ship shuddered again. A muffled explosion somewhere in the aft section told me the shields were down to 10%. My patience, which was usually a fairly sturdy commodity, was currently a smoldering ruin. "Listen to me, you luminescent princess," I growled, my voice dropping an octave. "I am a 32-year-old man who has spent the last 3 years running from every bounty hunter from here to the Andromeda Void because of that blasted video. If I wanted to eat you, I would have done it on the docking bay. You're currently 80% skin, 10% haughtiness, and 10% psychic energy. You'd taste like disappointment and glitter. Now open the door before the obsidian guards turn us both into stardust." There was a long, agonizing silence. Inside the room, I could hear her sharp, rhythmic breathing. Aetherians glowed brighter when they were terrified, and I could see the pale emerald light leaking through the door's seal, illuminating the grime on my boots. "How do I know?" she whispered. "Give me one reason to trust a species that evolved from apex predators." "Because," I said, leaning back against the opposite wall as the ship groaned under another volley of laser fire, "I'm the only one in this sector who isn't trying to sell your genetic code to the highest bidder. And because I actually like your haughtiness. It reminds me of home." The lock hissed. The door slid back just a few centimeters, revealing a single silver iris eye peering out from behind a curtain of obsidian black hair. Her skin, usually a vibrant emerald, was now a sickly, translucent jade. "You swear on your whatever humans hold sacred?" "I swear on the last bottle of authentic earth bourbon in the galley," I said, offering a tired, crooked smile, "which, if we don't move now, is going to be vaporized along with our dignity." Kyra stepped out, clutching a tattered silk cloak around her shoulders. She looked at me, then at my hands as if expecting to see claws. I just held out my palm, empty, scarred, and very much not holding a dinner fork. "Good choice," I said, grabbing her wrist and pulling her toward the cockpit. "Now run like you've got a hungry human behind you." "Too soon? Shut up, Drex," she hissed, but she didn't pull away. We sprinted through the narrow companionway, dodging a loose cooling pipe that was spraying freezing vapor into the air. The Void Jumper was a TR-45 freighter, a rusted bucket of bolts that I'd modified with enough illegal tech to warrant a life sentence on 5 different systems. It wasn't much, but it was fast and it was mine. "Rusty, status report," I barked as I slid into the pilot's seat. "Captain," the AI's voice crackled through the speakers, sounding remarkably like an elderly butler who had seen too much of the world. "Our shields are at 7%. The obsidian interceptors are locking on for a tractor beam. Also, I feel compelled to mention that your blood pressure is currently high enough to ignite a small sun. Perhaps a calming tea after we die? Just get the ghost drive ready, Rusty." "The ghost drive, Captain. That maneuver has a 42% chance of phasing us permanently into a non-linear dimension where we will exist as sentient mathematics." I like those odds better than being a specimen in a hegemony lab, I snapped, flipping a row of toggle switches. Kyra, strap in. It's about to get weird. She scrambled into the co-pilot's seat, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the harness. I reached over, my hand brushing hers, and for a second, the bioluminescence of her skin flared, a warm, golden spark that traveled up my arm. Aetherians were empathic. She could feel my focus, my fear, and the underlying stubborn resolve to keep her breathing. You're not scared, she whispered, looking at me in surprise. I'm terrified, Kyra, I said, slamming the throttle forward. I'm just really good at hiding it under a layer of professional idiocy. The stars outside the viewport didn't just move. They stretched, turning into long, shimmering needles of light. The ship groaned, a sound of metal screaming in protest against the laws of physics. Then, with a sound like a wet cloth tearing, the universe vanished, replaced by a gray, swirling mist of nothingness. We were in the mirror. I slumped back in the seat, my lungs finally remembering how to function. My hands were shaking, a fine tremor that I quickly hid by gripping the armrests. We're safe, I said, though my voice sounded hollow in the strange acoustics of the ghost drive. At least for the next 6 hours. They can't track us here. Kyra was staring out at the gray void, her eyes wide. She looked smaller in the dim light of the cockpit, the regal princess of the Zahel bloodline, replaced by a girl who had just lost everything. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Why risk your life for someone who thinks you're a cannibal? I looked at her, really looked at her. Her skin was beginning to pulse with a soft, rhythmic light, the Aetherian way of calming their own nervous system. Because 3 years ago, I stood by and watched while my crew was taken because I followed the rules, I said quietly. I decided then that I was done with rules, and because I hate the obsidian hegemony more than I hate being misunderstood. She didn't answer for a long time. She just watched the gray mist, her reflection in the viewport looking like a ghost. I'm sorry, she said finally, for what I said in the bathroom. I snorted. Don't worry about it. It's not the worst thing a girl has said to me. One time a Krell diplomat told me I had the charisma of a damp sponge. That one actually stung. A small, hesitant smile touched her lips. It was the first time I'd seen it. It was a beautiful thing, like a star forming in the dark. We have a long way to go, Drex. Yeah, I said, turning back to the consoles. And a lot of people to prove wrong. The memory hit me like a shot of cheap tequila. Burning, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. To understand why Kyra was convinced I wanted to turn her into a 3-course meal, you have to understand the place where it all started, the Shard of Orin. 3 nights ago, the Shard was screaming with life. It was a massive, hollowed-out asteroid, a lawless haven for those who preferred their business transactions to happen outside the reach of the Galactic Council. Imagine a city built by a madman, where skyscrapers grew downward from the ceiling and the air smelled of ozone, roasted street food, and desperation. I was at the Obsidian Vault, a casino so opulent it made your eyes bleed. The walls were lined with crushed diamonds, and the dealers were all high-end androids programmed with the wit of Oscar Wilde and the ruthlessness of a shark. I had been there for 6 hours and I was losing. Not just money, credits were easy to find, but my reputation. I needed a lead on the Obsidian Hegemony's latest shipments, and the only way to get it was to sit at the high-stakes table of a man named Vaxus. High Arbiter Vaxus was an Aetherian, like Kyra, but he was the kind of man who had replaced his soul with a ledger. His skin was a dull metallic silver, a sign of too many cybernetic enhancements. Mr. Vane, he had purred, his voice like silk over gravel. You are a curious specimen, a human hero with a penchant for trouble. I believe you are familiar with the life-stake game? I had leaned back, trying to look bored while my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I've heard of it. You bet years of your life expectancy against the pot. Exactly, Vaxus said, gesturing to a glowing crystalline sphere in the center of the table. The extractor takes the vitality directly from your cells. No pain, just a sudden aging, a fading of the light. And what are you betting, Vaxus? I had asked. He had smiled, and that's when I saw her. Kyra was standing behind him, frozen in a stasis field. She looked like a statue carved from emerald, her eyes wide and fixed in a permanent expression of betrayal. "I bet the girl," Vaxis said. "She is the daughter of a political rival, a diplomatic nuisance. Her life is worth 40 years of vitality on the black market." "Do you have 40 years to give, Mr. Vane? Or are you already too close to your expiration date?" The room had gone silent. Around us, the elite of the Shard, reptilian traders, multi-armed merchants, and silent obsidian-skinned guards, had leaned in, their eyes glinting with predatory interest. I knew the rumors. I knew that Vaxis had spent months planting stories about the human consumer to discredit my efforts to stop his smuggling rings. If I won her, the narrative would be simple. The human bought a slave to satisfy his barbaric urges. If I lost, I'd walk out of there an old man, if I walked out at all. I looked at Kyra. Even in stasis, she was breathtaking. But it wasn't her beauty that caught me. It was the way a single tear was frozen on her cheek. She wasn't a prize. She was a person being used as a pawn. "I'm in," I said, sliding my hand onto the extractor plate. The process was like having your soul vacuumed out through your pores, cold, agonizing, and hollow. I felt the strength leave my muscles, felt the sharp, vibrant colors of the world turn to a dull gray. I saw my hair turn gray in the reflection of the table, my skin wrinkling like parchment. Vaxis had laughed, confident in his victory. But he had forgotten one thing about humans. We are the only species that has mastered the art of the bluff, even against machines. I had spent months studying the extractor tech. I knew that the device didn't just measure vitality, it measured the perception of vitality. It was a psychic interface. And as a former combat medic, I knew how to flood my system with enough adrenaline and neurosuppressors to trick the sensors into thinking I was losing more than I was. When the final card was turned, a star void ace, the machine hissed. The energy surged back into me, a hot, violent tide of life that made my heart roar. I watched Vaxis's face turn from triumph to horror as the stasis field around Kyra dissolved. She had collapsed, and I had caught her. Her skin was cold, her mind a chaotic storm of fear. "Mine," I had whispered, mostly for the benefit of the cameras I knew were recording every second. Vaxis had snarled, his guards drawing their blasters. "You won't leave the station alive, Vane." "I've heard that before," I shouted, throwing a smoke grenade I'd hidden in my sleeve. "It's getting a bit repetitive." Back in the present, in the quiet gray of the ghost drive, Kyra was watching me. She was sitting on the edge of the crash couch, her silver eyes searching my face. "You cheated, didn't you?" she said. "At the vault." I felt the surge. It wasn't natural. I shrugged, checking the fuel gauges. "In a galaxy where the deck is stacked against you, Kyra, you'd be a fool to play fair." She looked down at her hands. "Vaxis told me you were a predator. He said you had a hunger that couldn't be satisfied. He showed me videos of you. After the Proxima rescue, you were covered in blood." I sighed, the weight of the past 3 years pressing down on me. I was covered in blood because I had just performed a field tracheotomy on a diplomat's daughter while 3 pirates were trying to bayonet me. I didn't eat her, Kyra. I saved her life. But human saves alien doesn't get as many clicks as human eats princess. "I know that now," she said softly. "I can feel the truth in your resonance. It's lonely." I didn't know what to say to that, so I focused on the nav computer. The mirror was a strange place. Time didn't flow here so much as it pooled. We were drifting through a sea of abandoned possibilities. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To find the only people who might be crazier than me," I said. "A group of women who have a very specific interest in keeping me alive." "The Echo Sisters?" I looked at her in surprise. "How do you know about them?" "I was a diplomat, Drex. I know about the underground networks, but I thought they were a myth, an urban legend for lonely spacers." "They're very real," I said, remembering the time a purple-skinned woman with 4 arms had smuggled me out of a prison colony in a laundry crate. And right now, they're our only hope. Because Vaxis didn't just want you for your life force. He wanted you because you have the key to the biopurity code's master overrides. Kyra stiffened, her skin flaring a sharp defensive orange. "How did you know about that?" "Because I'm a human," I said with a wink. We're nosy, we're stubborn, and we're very, very good at finding things people want to keep hidden. Now get some sleep. We drop out of the mirror in 4 hours, and I have a feeling the welcome party isn't going to involve cake. She lingered for a moment, her gaze lingering on the scar across my knuckles. Then without a word, she retreated to the sleeping quarters. I sat alone in the cockpit, the hum of the ship the only sound in the void. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked younger than I had at the casino, the vitality restored, but my eyes looked 100 years old. Prejudice is a hell of a drug, I whispered to the empty air, and the withdrawal is going to be a bitch. Captain, Rusty's voice broke the silence. I've detected a fluctuation in the mirror's wake. It appears we are being followed by something that doesn't obey the standard laws of nonlinear geometry. Of course we are, I muttered, reaching for my blaster. Wouldn't want things to be too easy. The mirror was not space, it was the absence of it. Imagine being submerged in a vat of liquid mercury that had forgotten how to be a metal and decided to become a dream instead. There were no stars, no constellations to guide a weary traveler, only a swirling, monochromatic mist that hummed at a frequency that made your teeth ache. Every time I looked out the viewport, I saw a dozen versions of the Void Jumper reflected in the gray, each one slightly different. In one, the ship was brand new. In another, it was a burning wreck. It was a place where causality went to die. And right now, something was hunting us through the corpses of our own possible futures. Rusty, give me a scan on that wake, I ordered, my hands hovering over the haptic controls. I had to be careful. One wrong twitch and we'd phase lock, becoming a permanent part of the scenery. The sensors were screaming, but the data was a jumbled mess of static and impossible geometries. Captain, the AI replied, its voice sounding strangely distorted, as if it were being spoken through a long, metallic pipe. The Pursuer is not a conventional vessel. It is an Echo Viper probe, a specialized hunter-killer designed by the Obsidian hegemony for deep phase pursuit. It doesn't track our engine heat, it tracks our intent. It tracks our intent? I barked, a harsh laugh escaping my throat. Great. So as long as I want to live, it knows exactly where I am. Remind me to develop a sudden desire for self-destruction once we clear this sector. Kyra came back into the cockpit then. She had changed out of the formal silk and into a pair of my old flight fatigues. They were 3 sizes too big for her, the sleeves rolled up in thick bunches around her emerald-hued wrists. She looked less like a princess and more like a stowaway, though the way she carried herself still screamed of high-born arrogance. She stopped dead when she saw the view outside. The mirror, she whispered, her skin pulsing with a soft, apprehensive silver light. My father always told me this place was a myth, a dumping ground for the souls of the damned. Your father sounds like a barrel of laughs, I muttered, not taking my eyes off the scanners. It's not a myth, Kyra. It's just a very inconvenient shortcut through a dimension that doesn't like visitors. And right now we have a guest who's about to overstay their welcome. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, her eyes fixed on the gray vortex. Why is it following us? If we are in the mirror, shouldn't we be invisible? The Echo Viper is a psychic parasite, I explained, bankrolling the ship into a steep, non-Euclidean curve. It locks onto the psionic signature of the crew, specifically yours. You're like a lighthouse in a fog bank, princess. To that thing, you're the only solid object in existence. I felt a pang of guilt as her face paled. It wasn't her fault she was born with a brain that could bridge the gap between stars. Aetherians were a miracle of evolution, but in a galaxy run by the Obsidian hegemony, a miracle was just another word for a weapon. Kyra looked at me, her silver eyes searching mine. Drex, back on the station before you won the game. Why did people look at you with such horror? It wasn't just the rumors. It was as if they were seeing a ghost. I stayed silent for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic thrum of the ghost drive. I had spent 3 years perfecting the art of not talking about the Proxima incident, but here, in the gray nothingness, with a psychic probe nipping at our heels, the truth felt like the only anchor I had left. It started on Proxima Prime, I began, my voice low. I was part of a medical relief team, a dirty, thankless job in the middle of a civil war. We were treating refugees in a sector that was being bombarded by biochemical agents. The daughter of the high diplomat, a girl named Alara, had been hit with a neurotoxin that was liquefying her nervous system. We didn't have the stabilizers. We didn't have the equipment. I gripped the flight stick until my knuckles turned white. All I had was my own blood. Humans have a unique enzyme, factor X7, that acts as a universal bridge for certain Aetherian-derived neurotoxins. I had to perform a direct transfusion. But because the atmosphere was contaminated, I couldn't use a machine. I had to use myself as a filter. I had to ingest the toxin-neutralizing serum, let my liver process it, and then, well, the only way to get it into her system fast enough was a direct mucosal exchange. Kyra's eyes widened. You gave her the breath of life? I snorted. Is that what you call it? On Earth, we just call it a desperate, last-ditch effort to keep someone from dying. I saved her. But a security drone caught the footage from a bad angle. To someone who didn't understand human biology or medical necessity, it looked like I was, well, let's just say it looked like I was feasting on her essence. The translation software didn't help, I continued, my bitterness leaking into every word. It translated biological exchange as consumption of the life force. Vaxis saw that footage and realized he could use it. He didn't just want to discredit me. He wanted to turn humans into monsters. If we're monsters, then nobody cares when the hegemony sanitizes our colonies. Nobody complains when they pass laws that treat us like rabid animals. Kyra reached out, her fingers hovering just millimeters above the back of my hand. She didn't touch me, but I could feel the warmth of her empathy radiating off her skin. You were saving her, she whispered, and the galaxy turned it into a nightmare. That's the thing about prejudice, Kyra, I said, finally meeting her gaze. It's easier to believe a scary lie than a complicated truth. It makes the world feel simpler. Us versus them. The hunters versus the prey. Captain, the Echo Viper has reached striking distance, Rusty interrupted, the calm tone of the AI jarring against the heavy atmosphere of the cockpit. It is preparing to launch a neural disruption spike. Estimated time to impact, 60 seconds. I snapped back into action. Not today, you metallic leech. Kyra, I need you to do something. It's going to be dangerous and it's going to hurt. Tell me, she said, her voice suddenly steady. I need you to project. Not a message, not a thought. I need you to project a fake intent. I need you to want to be somewhere else. Not just think it. You have to feel it with every fiber of your being. I'm going to vent the plasma from the port thrusters. The probe will lock on to the combination of your psychic echo and the heat signature. While it's distracted, I'm going to pull us out of the mirror. Where should I want to be? She asked. Home, I said. Think of the brightest, safest place you've ever known. She closed her eyes and the cockpit was suddenly filled with an intense, golden radiance. It wasn't just light, it was a feeling. I smelled jasmine and ozone. I felt the warmth of a summer sun on my skin. It was beautiful, and for a second, I almost forgot we were dying. Now, I yelled. I slammed the emergency vent. A cloud of shimmering, ionized gas erupted from the ship, caught in the gray mists of the mirror. At the same time, I felt a massive surge of psychic energy from Kyra. It was like a silent scream of longing. The Echo Viper veered wildly, its sleek, obsidian form diving into the plasma cloud, thinking it had finally caught its prey. Engaging transition, I roared. The world turned inside out. The gray mist shattered like glass, and for a heartbeat, I felt like every atom in my body was being pulled in a different direction. Then, with a thunderous boom that shook the ship to its core, we were back. The blackness of real space felt like a warm blanket. In front of us, the weeping nebula glowed in shades of violet and crimson, a massive swirling cloud of gas and dust that looked like a celestial bruise. We made it, I gasped, my chest heaving. Rusty, location? We are on the outskirts of the Shroud sector, Captain, exactly where we intended to be. Although I must note that the ghost drive is now approximately 98% slag. We won't be doing that again without a miracle or a very expensive repair bill. I didn't care about the drive. I looked over at Kyra. She was slumped in her seat, her skin a dull, ashen gray. She had given everything to that projection. Kyra? I unbuckled my harness and moved to her side. She opened her eyes and they were dim, the silver irises cloudy. Did it work? Yeah, I said, gently brushing a strand of dark hair away from her face. It worked. You were amazing. She managed a weak, tired smile. I thought of the gardens of my mother's estate. I thought of the way the light hits the crystal spires at dawn. I didn't want to leave. I know, I said, feeling a strange tightness in my throat. But you're safe now. I promise. The comms unit beeped, a sharp rhythmic signal that wasn't a distress call or a military hail. It was a sequence of tones that sounded like a lullaby played on a synthesizer. That's the beacon, I said, a wave of relief washing over me. The Echo Sisters. They're here. A holographic screen flickered to life, showing a cluster of ships hidden deep within the nebula's folds. They were a ragtag collection of vessels, freighters, scouts, and even a decommissioned medical frigate, all tethered together like a floating island of scrap and hope. Unknown vessel, this is Sanctuary 1, a voice crackled through the speakers. It was a voice I recognized, sultry, confident, and sounding like it belonged to someone who had seen every corner of the galaxy and found most of them wanting. We've been expecting you, Dreamer. Hope you didn't bring any uninvited guests. Just one, I said, leaning over the comms, and she's with me. Welcome home, Drex, the voice replied. Bring her in. We have a lot to talk about. As I steered the void jumper toward the hidden base, I looked at Kyra. She was watching me, her fear replaced by a burgeoning curiosity. Who are they? She asked. The only people who know that a human is more than just a mouth with teeth, I said. The only ones who aren't afraid of the dark. Docking at the sanctuary was like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake. The station was a labyrinthine mess of pressurized modules and jury-rigged gravity plating, all held together by the collective willpower of its inhabitants. As the airlock cycled, a familiar scent wafted into the ship, a mixture of sandalwood, high-grade engine oil, and the sharp tang of a dozen different alien spices. I stepped out first, my hand still resting instinctively on the grip of my blaster. The hangar was dim, illuminated by strings of flickering LED lights that cast long, dancing shadows across the floor. Max! A voice boomed, and before I could react, I was engulfed in a flurry of movement. 4 arms wrapped around me in a crushing embrace, and I felt the air leave my lungs with a startled oof. Quatra, the purple-skinned powerhouse from Nexus Station, squeezed me until I heard my spine pop, then held me at arm's length, her 4 amber eyes scanning me for damage. You look like garbage, Dreamer, she said, her 3 lips curving into a grin that was both terrifying and incredibly welcoming. All that running is finally catching up with your fragile human metabolism. Good to see you too, Quatra, I wheezed, adjusting my jacket. I see your hospitality is as subtle as a supernova. She laughed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the hangar. Then her gaze shifted to the airlock, where Kyra was stepping out, her posture stiff and her bioluminescence flared to a bright, defensive gold. And this must be the prize, Quatra said, her tone shifting to something more respectful. Princess Kyra Zahel. I've heard many things about you. Most of them involve your impending demise. It's a pleasure to see the rumors were exaggerated. Kyra looked at the 4-armed woman with a mixture of awe and suspicion. Who are you? And why do you call him Dreamer? Quatra winked at me. Because only a dreamer would try to save the galaxy with a rusted ship and a reputation for cannibalism. Come. Vera is waiting. We were led through the station's corridors, which were packed with a dizzying array of species. I saw a group of reptilian soldiers playing a game of chance with a 3-eyed vendor. I saw a feathered scholar debating with a floating mist entity near a hydroponics bay. It was a microcosm of everything the Obsidian hegemony hated: diversity, chaos, and the unapologetic existence of those who didn't fit into their biopurity vision. This is the Echo Network? Kyra whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the sights. I thought it was just women who liked Max. I winced at the liked Max part. It's more than that, Kyra. These are the people the hegemony tried to erase. The refugees, the dissidents, the ones whose biological signatures were deemed unstable. They're the ghosts in the machine. We reached a large circular room at the heart of the station that had been converted into a command center. Hollow maps of the Shroud sector floated in the air, glowing with the positions of hegemony patrols and smuggling routes. At the center stood a woman whose skin was the color of a winter twilight, her hair a cascade of silver wires that seemed to pulse with their own light. This was Vera, the leader of the Echo Sisters and one of the most wanted individuals in the known universe. Drex Vane, she said, her voice like a cool breeze. You've brought us a firebrand. Kyra stepped forward, her regal training kicking in despite the surroundings. I am not a firebrand. I am a representative of the Aetherian Council, and I demand to know why I have been brought here. Vara looked at her with an expression that was both pitying and profound. You were brought here because the Aetherian Council no longer exists, Princess. 2 hours ago, the Obsidian Hegemony declared Lumina Prime a protectorate. Your father has been placed under house arrest, and your brother has been named the new High Arbiter. The color drained from Kyra's face. No, that's impossible. My brother would never. Your brother is a pragmatist, Vara interrupted gently. He saw the writing on the wall. He signed the biopurity code in exchange for a seat at the hegemony's table. He's the one who authorized the Echo Viper to hunt you down. To him, you're not a sister. You're a liability. Kyra stumbled back, and for a second, the gold light of her skin flickered and died, leaving her in total darkness. I reached out and steadied her, my hand firm on her shoulder. She didn't pull away this time. She leaned into me, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Why? She whispered. Why go to all this trouble for a code? Vera gestured to a large holographic display. A map of the Aetherian psionic web appeared, a shimmering lattice of connections that spanned their entire star system. The biopurity code isn't about biology, Vara explained. It's about frequency. The hegemony has developed a way to tune the Aetherian network. By labeling certain bloodlines as impure, they can justify using neural dampeners on them. They aren't trying to clean the galaxy. They're trying to build a galactic antenna. With the Aetherian web under their control, they can broadcast a subsonic signal that influences the decision-making centers of every sentient species. Mind control, I said, the word feeling like ash in my mouth. On a massive scale, Vera nodded. And you, Kyra, possess the unique genetic resonance required to stabilize the master frequency. Vaxis didn't want to kill you. He wanted to use you as a living battery. The room went silent, the weight of the revelation pressing down on all of us. I looked at Kyra, who was staring at the holographic map with an expression of pure horror. Everything she had been taught to believe about her people, her family, and her purpose had been a lie. I'm just a tool to them, she said, her voice flat. A piece of equipment. Welcome to the club, I said, my voice surprisingly soft. To them, we're all just tools or obstacles. Humans are obstacles because we're too unpredictable to tune. You're a tool because you're too powerful to ignore. Vera turned to me, her silver eyes piercing. Drex, the hegemony is moving the amplifier to the Shard of Orin for the final calibration. The Galactic Council meeting is in 3 days. If we don't stop them before they activate the web, it's over. Every diplomat, every leader, every citizen will be walking in a dream of the hegemony's making. And let me guess, I said, rubbing my temples. We're the ones who have to stop them. You have the ship, Vara said. You have the skills. And most importantly, you have the only person in the galaxy who can disrupt the frequency from the inside. She looked at Kyra. Princess, I know you're tired. I know you're afraid. But your people are being turned into puppets. Only you can cut the strings. Kyra looked at Vara, then at Quatra, and finally at me. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. The silence stretched, filled with the hum of the station and the distant sound of ships docking. I was raised to be a diplomat, Kyra said finally, her voice regaining some of its former strength. I was taught that the greatest virtue was order. But if this is the order they want, then I choose chaos. I grinned, a real, genuine grin that felt like it had been missing for years. Now that's my kind of talk. But we have a problem, I said, looking at Vara. The Void Jumper is a mess. The Ghost Drive is fried, and we're running low on credits. If we're going to storm the Shard, we need more than a few blasters and a lot of attitude. Vara smiled, a slow, knowing expression. That's why we're here, Drex. The Echo Sisters have been stockpiling more than just information. She led us to a large bay at the back of the command center. Inside, a dozen mechanics were working on a sleek black vessel that looked like a cross between a fighter and a shadow. Its hull was coated in a light-absorbent material that seemed to drink the very air around it. The Nightingale, Vara said. It's a prototype stealth corvette, outfitted with a manual override drive and a suite of electronic warfare tools that can ghost any hegemony radar. It's yours. I walked up to the ship, running my hand along the cool, smooth hull. It was a beautiful piece of work, a ship built for a mission where failure wasn't an option. And the credits? I asked. Quattro stepped forward, tossing a small glowing data chip onto a nearby table. 50,000 credits, a gift from your Appreciation Society. Consider it a down payment on your continued existence. I stared at the chip, then at the four-armed woman. You guys are serious about this fan club thing, aren't you? Quattro laughed, clapping me on the shoulder with two of her hands. Honey, when a man risks his neck for a woman the way you do, it creates a certain kind of brand loyalty. Don't let it go to your head. As the crew began prepping the Nightingale for departure, Kyra and I found ourselves alone for a moment on the viewing deck. Below us, the nebula swirled in an endless dance of light and shadow, beautiful and indifferent to the struggles of the tiny beings inhabiting it. Are you sure about this, Kyra? I asked, leaning against the railing. This isn't a diplomatic mission. It's a suicide run. If we go to the Shard, there's a good chance we're not coming back. She looked at me, her skin pulsing with a steady, tranquil green light. I've spent 24 years living in a palace of glass, Drex. I was protected, I was pampered, and I was completely blind. For the first time in my life, I can see the stars for what they really are. And what are they? Hope, she said, her silver eyes bright, and a hell of a lot of work. I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before the Proxima incident. We were two broken people on a mission to save a galaxy that didn't even want to be saved. It was crazy, it was reckless, and it was exactly where I belonged. Let's go save the world, Princess, I said, offering her my arm. I hear the food on the Shard is terrible anyway. She took my arm, her touch light but firm. Just don't try to eat the help, Drex. I laughed, the sound echoing through the station. It was a good sound, a human sound, and for the first time in 3 years, it didn't feel like a lie. We headed toward the Nightingale, the shadows of the sanctuary closing in around us. We were leaving the ghosts behind and heading into the heart of the storm. The Obsidian hegemony had their laws, their codes, and their antennas, but we had something they'd never understand. We had the truth, and we had each other. The planet Heliox 4 was a celestial tragedy. Once a vibrant trade hub for the mid-rim territories, it had been reduced to a galactic dumping ground, a rotting graveyard of fused titanium and leaking radioactive waste. From orbit, the planet looked like a tarnished copper coin, scarred by the atmospheric friction of 1 billion tons of discarded technology. This was where the Obsidian hegemony sent things it wanted the universe to forget. Outdated medical frigates, malfunctioning labor droids, and occasionally political dissidents who were disposed of without a trial. We need a phase shift regulator, I said, checking the Nightingale's diagnostic screen for the 20th time in the last hour. If we're going to sneak past the orange sensor nets, this ship needs to be able to vibrate at a frequency the hegemony computers think is just background cosmic radiation. And the only place that still has those old-school analog regulators is the scrapyard of Heliox. Kyra sat in the navigator's seat, her fingers tracing a glowing holographic map of the planet's surface. She looked exhausted, the silver light of her skin dimmed to the color of a rainy morning. The revelations from the Echo Sisters had taken a toll. It was one thing to be a princess in a tower. It was another to realize your entire family had turned the tower into a prison for everyone else. Can we not simply buy one? She asked, her voice tight with a fatigue that went deeper than bone. We have 50,000 credits. Surely that is enough to purchase a single component. In a normal world, Princess, sure, I replied. Bank the ship into a steep descent through Heliox 4's toxic upper atmosphere. But 50,000 credits won't buy you a phase shift regulator on the open market because the hegemony banned them 10 years ago. They're too hard to track. The only people who still have them are the scav kings of the wastes. and they don't take credits. They take things they can use: fuel, medicine, or information. The ship shuddered as we hit the lower clouds, a thick, mustard-colored soup of sulfur and industrial particulates. The Nightingale handled the turbulence with a grace that the Void Jumper could only dream of, but it still felt like we were being tossed around inside a giant's tin can. "Keep your eyes on the long-range scanners," I told her. "The scavs are territorial. They've got modified anti-air batteries that can punch a hole through our shields if they think we're a hegemony scouting party." "I am not a soldier, Drex," Kyra said, her voice rising in frustration. "I am a diplomat. I was trained to negotiate treaties, not to scan for primitive missile silos in a literal pile of garbage." "Then negotiate with the scanners," I snapped, my own nerves fraying, "because if we get shot down, there won't be anyone left to sign your treaties." The tension in the cockpit was thick enough to choke a Krell. Kyra glared at me, her bioluminescence flaring into a sharp, indignant orange. For a second, she looked like she was going to scream, but then she took a long, shaky breath and turned back to the console. "Targeting sensors are active," she muttered, her tone icy. "I have a lock on a cluster of thermal signatures 3 kilometers to the southeast. It looks like a permanent settlement built inside the hull of a crashed dreadnought." "That's our spot," I said, easing the throttle back. "Heliox Prime, the crown jewel of the gutter. Landing on a planet of junk is an art form. You have to find a patch of ground that isn't actually a hidden crevice or a pile of unstable debris." I set the Nightingale down on a flat expanse of rusted plating that looked like it might have been a landing strip 200 years ago. The moment the engines cut, a dozen small, scurrying shapes emerged from the shadows of the surrounding scrap piles. "Check your 6, I whispered, grabbing my tactical belt and a heavy-duty medical kit. "And whatever you do, don't show them your skin. Keep that cloak tight." "Why the medical kit?" Kyra asked, following me to the airlock. "I thought we were here for a regulator. On a world like this, antibiotics are worth more than gold," I explained. "And hope is the most expensive commodity of all." We stepped out into the air of Heliox 4, and it felt like being slapped in the face with a wet metallic rag. The sky was a bruised purple, and the horizon was a jagged line of rusted skyscrapers and skeletal ship ribs. The air was thick with the smell of scorched ozone and rot. The figures approached us warily. They were a motley crew of various species, mostly humans and reptilian variants, dressed in rags and armored with pieces of discarded ship plating. They held primitive projectile rifles and scavenged plasma cutters, their eyes narrowed with suspicion. "That's far enough," one of the humans called out. His face was covered in a patchwork of scars and cybernetic implants that looked like they'd been installed with a hammer. "We don't want any hegemony trouble here." I raised my hands, palms open. "We're not hegemony. We're just travelers in need of a phase shift regulator. I've got medical supplies, clean water, anti-radiation meds, and enough stims to keep your crew going for a month." The man spat on the ground. A human smuggler and his glowing pet. "I know who you are, Vane. I've seen the vids. You're that cannibal bastard from Proxima." Kyra stiffened beside me, her hand moving toward her concealed blaster. But I shook my head. "Not now," I signaled. "I'm the guy who saved a diplomat's daughter and got framed for it," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "But you can believe whatever helps you sleep at night. My medicine is real, regardless of what you think of my appetite." The man looked at the medical kit, then at his crew. One of the Varians hissed something in their native tongue, gesturing toward the back of the settlement. "Our leader, Sarn, is sick," the man said, his eyes flickering with a moment of uncertainty. "Hegemony biovirus. If your medicine can save him, you get your regulator. If he dies, your dinner. I hear humans taste like chicken." I didn't blink. "Take me to him." The settlement was a nightmare of cramped, lightless tunnels and makeshift living quarters. Everywhere I looked, I saw the victims of the hegemony's purity campaign: children with stunted limbs, elders coughing up black bile, and soldiers with rotting cybernetics. This was the cost of the order Kyra had once championed, the discarded remnants of a galaxy that was being cleaned for the elite. Kyra was silent as we walked, her silver eyes taking in every detail. I could feel her resonance shifting, the arrogance fading into a deep, hollow horror. She was seeing the reality of her brother's pragmatism. We were led into a large chamber at the center of the dreadnought. On a bed of stained fabric lay a Vorian, his scales a dull, sickly gray. His breathing was labored, and his chest was covered in weeping sores. Hegemony Viral X, I muttered, kneeling beside him. They use it to clear out illegal settlements. It's a slow, agonizing way to go. Can you save him? The man asked, his rifle still pointed at my head. Maybe, I said, opening the kit. But I need your help. Kyra, I need you to use your resonance. Not to communicate, but to stabilize his nervous system. The virus works by overloading the pain receptors. If you can dull the feedback, the medicine will have a chance to work. Kyra hesitated, her eyes darting to the hostile soldiers surrounding us. Drex, if I reveal my power? They already know you're Aetherian, I said, not looking up as I prepared a syringe of neutralizer. Just do it. She knelt beside me, her hands hovering over the Vorian's chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a soft, pulsating emerald light began to flow from her fingertips. It wasn't the sharp, defensive flare she used in combat. It was a gentle, rhythmic glow that seemed to soothe the very air around her. The Vorian's breathing eased. The frantic, terrified rasping slowed into a steady rhythm. The soldiers lowered their weapons, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and reverence. They had never seen an Aetherian use their power for healing. To them, the glowing ones were the masters who sent the viruses, not the ones who cured them. I injected the serum, my hands moving with a precision that I hadn't used in years. For the next hour, we worked in silence. I cleaned the sores and administered the stabilizers, while Kyra held the psychic bridge, her face beaded with sweat. She was pouring her own vitality into a creature that her culture would have deemed impure. Finally, the Vorian's eyes fluttered open. The gray film was gone, replaced by a clear, amber gaze. He looked at Kyra, then at me, and let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. He's stable, I said, sitting back and wiping my brow. He'll need rest and clean water, but he'll live. The leader, the man with the scarred face, lowered his rifle completely. He looked at the Vorian, then back at us. His expression was no longer hostile. It was confused. Why? He asked. Why save a Vorian scavenger? You're a human. You could have just stolen the regulator and left. Because being a human doesn't mean being a monster, I said, packing my kit, and because I know what it's like to be judged for things you didn't choose. Your leader isn't an impure life form. He's a guy who's trying to survive. Just like me. Just like her. The man stayed silent for a long moment. Then he signaled to one of the others. Go to the vault, bring the regulator, and bring them a crate of fuel on the house. As we walked back to the Nightingale, the weight of the regulator heavy in my pack, Kyra didn't speak. She was looking at the scavengers who were now nodding to us as we passed. Some of the children even waved. Drex, she said as we reached the airlock, why did you let them think you were a cannibal? Why didn't you try to explain? Because an explanation is just words, Kyra, I said, looking out at the jagged horizon of Heliox 4. People don't change their minds because of words. They change their minds because of what they see. I saved that man because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted to prove I wasn't a monster. But in the process, I might have made it a little harder for them to believe the next lie the hegemony tells them. She looked at me, her silver eyes shimmering with a new kind of light. It wasn't the arrogance of a princess or the fear of a refugee. It was the beginning of an understanding. You're a good man, Drex Vane. Don't go spreading that around, I said with a tired grin. It'll ruin my reputation. We boarded the ship and prepared for takeoff. The regulator was installed, the stealth field was calibrated, and we had enough fuel to make it to the Shard of Orn. But as the engines roared to life, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real test hadn't even started yet. We had saved one life on a planet of garbage, but in 3 days we were going to try and save 1 trillion. And the hegemony wouldn't be as easy to convince as a group of desperate scavengers. The Shard of Orn was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance, a massive, crystalline wedge of space station that hung in the void like a dagger pointed at the heart of the galaxy. It didn't just orbit a planet, it created its own gravity, its own atmosphere, and its own laws. This was the seat of the Obsidian hegemony's power in the Mid-Rim, and tonight, it was the host of the Galactic Council's emergency session we were ghosting. The Nightingale's stealth field was working perfectly, the phase shift regulator humming a low, steady tune that made the ship practically invisible to the Orin sensor nets. We drifted through the clouds of orbital traffic, luxurious yachts, heavy freighters, and swarms of security drones, like a phantom in a crowded room. "Remember the plan," I whispered, my eyes locked on the station's docking bay, 42. We dock in the maintenance sector using the codes Vara gave us. From there, it's a 2-kilometer trek through the cooling ducts to the executive level. "Kyra, you need to stay in the shadows until we reach the amplifier. If they see you before we're in position, the whole thing goes sideways." "I understand," she replied. Her voice was steady, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. She was wearing a sleek, black infiltration suit that made her look like a shadow herself. Her skin was dimmed to a dull, matte gray, a trick of Aetherian biological controls she'd perfected over the last few hours. "We're coming up on the bay, Rusty," I said. "Manual docking on my mark." "Acknowledge, Captain," the AI replied. "I have deactivated the external lighting and bypassed the landing pad's automated handshake. May I suggest we move quickly?" The Hegemony's security subroutines are currently distracted by the arrival of the High Chancellor's convoy, but that window will not remain open for long. The docking was a silent affair. The Nightingale slipped into the shadows of a massive waste reclamation bay, its landing struts settling onto the rusted plating with a barely audible hiss. We disembarked immediately, moving through the labyrinthine corridors of the maintenance sector with a practiced urgency. The air here was cold and smelled of recycled oxygen and grease. This was the underbelly of the Shard, where the automated systems kept the crystal spires above running smoothly. We climbed through a vertical access shaft, our movements silent thanks to the dampening fields in our boots. "Drex, look," Kyra whispered, gesturing to a massive viewing port we were passing. I looked out, and my heart skipped a beat. Below us, in the station's central atrium, the Galactic Council was gathering. I saw representatives from 100 different species, scaled, feathered, multi-limbed, and gaseous, all taking their seats in the grand amphitheater. At the center, on a raised dais, stood High Arbiter Vaxis. He looked regal in his ceremonial robes, his silver skin gleaming under the artificial suns. "He looks so confident," Kyra said, her voice trembling. "He looks like he's already won." "That's because he thinks he has," I said, pulling her back into the shadows. "Arrogance is the Hegemony's greatest weapon, but it's also their biggest weakness. They don't think anyone is brave enough, or stupid enough, to challenge them here." We reached the cooling ducts, a vast network of massive pipes that hummed with the flow of cryogenic liquid. This was the back door Vara had told us about. The pipes led directly into the foundation of the executive level, bypassing the primary security checkpoints. The trek was grueling. We crawled through narrow conduits, navigated past rotating turbine blades, and dodged the occasional maintenance drone. Every sound felt like a gunshot in the cramped space, every shadow a potential assassin. As we approached the executive level, the air began to change. It became warmer, perfumed with the scent of exotic flowers and expensive incense. We were nearing the heart of the beast. "Wait," I hissed, holding up a hand. Ahead of us, the duct opened into a small, secluded balcony overlooking a private meeting chamber. Inside, Vaxis was speaking with someone. I recognized the voice immediately. It was Kyra's brother, Prince Kalen. "The calibration is almost complete," Vaxis was saying, his voice smooth and cold. "Once the Council votes to authorize the Biopurity Initiative, we activate the amplifier. The Aetherian web will carry the signal, and the galaxy will finally have the peace it deserves." "And my sister?" Kalen asked. His voice was different than I remembered, thinner, more anxious. "You promised she would be returned to the family." "Your sister is a complication, Kalen," Vaxis replied, "but don't worry, she's being handled. Once the web is active, her rebellious tendencies will be smoothed out along with everyone else's. She'll be the perfect diplomat again, the perfect puppet." Kyra gasped beside me, her skin flaring a sharp, agonized blue. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back before the glow could be seen. "Steady," I whispered. "We knew he was a snake." "He's my brother," she choked out, her silver eyes filling with tears. He's selling our entire species for a seat at the table. He's, he's worse than Vaxus. The betrayal was a physical weight in the air. Kyra had spent her whole life believing in the nobility of her bloodline, in the inherent goodness of the Aetherian people. Seeing her own brother trade their souls for power was the final shattering of her mirror. "We have to stop them," she said, her voice suddenly cold and hard as diamond. "Not just for the galaxy, Drex. For my people. For the ones he's betraying." We moved through the final stretch of the duct and emerged into a service corridor just outside the main amplifier chamber. The room was guarded by 2 obsidian soldiers in full-power armor, their heavy pulse rifles held at the ready. "I'll take the one on the left," I said, checking my blaster's charge. "You take the right. On 3, 1, 2, 3. We burst out of the shadows. I fired 2 shots in rapid succession, the plasma bolt slagging the guard's helmet sensors before he could react. Beside me, Kyra moved with a grace that was terrifying. She didn't use a weapon, she used herself. She lunged at the second guard, her hands glowing with a blinding, white-hot light. She touched his chest plate, and a massive surge of psychic energy buckled the armor, sending the soldier flying into the wall. "He's down," she said, her voice breathless. We ran into the chamber. At the center of the room sat the amplifier, a massive, intricate structure of black crystal and pulsing fiber optics. It looked like a giant mechanical heart, its rhythmic glow filling the room with a sickening violet light. "Rusty, I'm in," I said, tapping my comms. "Give me the bypass codes." "Captain, I'm sorry," the AI's voice crackled, but it was filled with static. Something is wrong. The station's internal firewall it's not a firewall, it's an echo trap." My blood ran cold. "Rusty." A shadow moved at the edge of the chamber. I spun around, blaster raised, but it was too late. A massive, invisible force slammed into me, throwing me against the crystal structure. My blaster skittered across the floor, out of reach. I looked up, dazed, as Vera stepped out of the shadows. But it wasn't the Vera I knew. Her skin was no longer twilight-colored. It was a deep, obsidian black, and her silver hair was pulsing with a dark, malevolent energy. "Vara?" Kyra asked, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" "Saving the galaxy, Princess," Vera said, her voice echoing with a strange double-tone quality. "Just like you." "But the plan, the Echo Sisters." "The Echo Sisters were a necessary fiction," Vara said, walking toward the amplifier. "A way to gather the necessary components. The phase shift regulator from Heliox, the genetic resonance of a Zahel princess, and of course, a human hero to take the fall when everything goes wrong." She looked at me, her eyes devoid of any emotion. "You were so easy to manipulate, Drex. Your guilt over Proxima made you the perfect pawn. You wanted to be a hero so badly that you never stopped to ask why a group of refugees had access to a stealth corvette and high-level hegemony security codes." "You're working for Vaxus?" I spat, trying to push myself up, but the psionic pressure was like a mountain on my chest. "Working for him?" Vera laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Vaxus is a small-minded bureaucrat with delusions of grandeur. He wants to control the galaxy. I want to reset it. The biopurity code was my idea. The amplifier? My design. Vaxus is just the delivery boy." She touched the surface of the amplifier, and the violet light turned a deep, obsidian black. "Once the signal is broadcast," she continued, "it won't just influence minds. It will purge the impurities. It will collapse the nervous systems of any species that doesn't meet the genetic criteria. No more chaos. No more humans. No more lesser races. Just a perfect, silent universe." Kyra stood between Vera and the amplifier, her skin glowing with a defiant, brilliant white. "You won't do this. I won't let you." "My dear," Vera said, a cruel smile touching her lips. "You are the final piece of the puzzle. Your resonance is what will carry the purge to every corner of the galaxy. You aren't here to stop the machine. You are the machine." Vera raised her hand, and a wave of dark energy washed over Kyra. She screamed, her bioluminescence flickering violently as she was lifted off the ground, her body becoming a conduit for the amplifier's dark power. "Kyra!" I yelled, struggling against the psionic grip. Don't worry, Drex, Vara said, looking at me with cold indifference. You won't have to watch for long. In 10 minutes, the purge will begin, and you'll be the first to go. A fitting end for the cannibal of Proxima. I lay on the cold floor, watching as the woman I had come to trust, the woman who had taught me that I wasn't a monster, prepared to commit the greatest genocide in history. And the worst part? She was using the one person I had finally allowed myself to care about to do it. The betrayal was complete. The plan was in motion. And as the violet light of the amplifier began to pulse with a new, deadly rhythm, I realized that prejudice wasn't just a scary lie. It was a weapon. And we had just handed it to the person who knew exactly how to use it. The weight of Vera's psionic grip was not like gravity. It was like being buried alive in cold, sentient lead. It pressed against my ribs, making every breath a jagged struggle, and coiled around my skull until my vision began to fracture into shimmering, violet shards. I lay there on the cold, polished floor of the amplifier chamber, watching the woman I had trusted, the woman who had given me a ship and a reason to believe in something again, systematically prepare to murder a trillion souls. You look surprised, Drex, Vera said, her voice echoing with that haunting, double-tone resonance. Her skin was now a deep, shifting obsidian, the silver wires of her hair lashing out like angry snakes. It's a very human expression, surprised that the world doesn't fit into the neat little box of hero and villain you've constructed to soothe your guilty conscience. I tried to speak, but the pressure on my throat only allowed for a wet, gurgling sound. My lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. I know what you want to ask, she continued, stepping over my paralyzed body to adjust a dial on the black crystal heart of the machine. Why? It's the question of a species that thrives on chaos. You want a reason, you want a motive. But the truth is, there is no malice here, only mathematics. The galaxy is a garden, Drex, and right now it's overgrown with weeds. Humans, Vorians, the Krell, you are all biological noise. You consume, you destroy, and you pollute the frequency of the universe. She turned her gaze toward Kyra, who was suspended 5 meters in the air, her body arched in an agonizing curve. The emerald light of her skin was being forcibly drained, pulled into the amplifier's core by glowing tendrils of dark energy. Kyra's mouth was open in a silent scream, her silver eyes rolling back in her head. Stop! I managed to wheeze out, the words tearing at my vocal cords. Vera tilted her head, a mock expression of pity on her darkened face. Still trying to play the protector? It's endearing, really, but she isn't suffering. Not in the way you understand. She's becoming part of something perfect. Her resonance is the carrier wave. Through her, the biopurity signal will reach every nervous system connected to the Aetherian web. The impurities, the ones like you, will simply stop. A sudden, painless cessation of consciousness, like a light being switched off. She leaned down, her obsidian face inches from mine. And you, the great human consumer, will be the first to go quiet. Your death will be the opening note of a symphony of silence. The pressure intensified, and for a second I felt my heart skip a beat. My neural pathways were being flooded with white noise. This was it, the big exit. KIA in a crystal room because I was too stupid to see through a pretty speech about sanctuary. I closed my eyes, and for some reason, I didn't see the dark chamber or Vera's cold face. I saw a dusty medical tent on Proxima Prime. I saw the girl Alara, her skin turning gray as the toxin took hold. I saw myself, a desperate young medic, choosing to break every rule of biological safety to save one life. Being a human doesn't mean being a monster, I'd told Kyra on the junk world. It means being the one who makes a choice. The thought sparked something in the back of my mind, a memory of my own biology. Vera thought we were noise. She thought we were trash because we were unpredictable and messy. But the very thing she hated about us, our biological volatility, was the only thing she couldn't account for in her perfect equations. I wasn't just a pilot. I was a carrier of factor X7. My blood was a chemical chaotician, an enzyme specifically designed to bridge and disrupt alien neurotoxins. And Vera's psionic signal? It was just another form of neurotoxic input. I reached deep into my tactical vest, my fingers moving with agonizing slowness. Vera was focused on the amplifier, her back to me as she hummed a low, dissonant tone to sync her mind with the machine. I found the emergency medical kit, the one I'd used to save the Vorian scavenger. Inside was a single, high-potency dose of adrenaline synth. It was designed to restart a heart that had been flatlined by trauma. I didn't need it for my heart. I needed it to jumpstart my nervous system enough to override the dampening field. With a roar of effort that felt like my bones were snapping, I jammed the needle through my flight suit and directly into my thigh. The world exploded into fire. My heart didn't just beat, it slammed against my ribs like a jackhammer. My vision cleared instantly, the violet shards replaced by a sharp, jagged clarity. The adrenaline synth surged through my veins, igniting the Factor X7 enzymes. My blood felt like boiling mercury. I could hear the hum of the station, the distant murmur of the council below, and the frantic, rhythmic pulse of the amplifier. I wasn't quiet anymore. I was a goddamn riot. Vara spun around, her eyes widening in genuine shock. How? You should be flatlined. I'm a human, I snarled, pushing myself up from the floor. My muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline drowned out the pain. We don't do quiet very well. I lunged for my blaster, but Vera was faster. She lashed out with a psychic whip of obsidian energy, catching me across the chest and throwing me back against a cooling pipe. The metal hissed as it dented under my weight, and the smell of scorched fabric filled the air. "You are a cockroach," she hissed, her composure finally breaking. A stubborn, filthy relic of a dying age. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged, adrenaline-fueled gulps. "Yeah, well, cockroaches have a habit of surviving the apocalypse, boss man." I didn't reach for the blaster this time. I reached for the manual override lever on the cooling pipe. If I couldn't stop Vara with a laser, I'd stop her with the one thing she hated most: physical, mechanical chaos. I yanked the lever down. The pipe burst with a deafening roar, spraying a high-pressure jet of cryogenic fluid directly into the amplifier's primary power couplings. The violet light flickered violently, turning a sickly, mottled gray. The room was suddenly filled with freezing mist, the temperature dropping 40 degrees in a matter of seconds. "No!" Vera screamed, her psychic grip on the room wavering as she scrambled to shield the crystal core from the flash freeze. The pressure on my chest vanished. I didn't waste a second. I sprinted toward the central dais, leaping over a series of sparking cables. I grabbed my blaster from the floor and fired a continuous beam at the base of the amplifier's containment field. The field didn't break, but it buckled, the energy bleeding off into the freezing mist. Above us, Kyra let out a sharp, gasping breath as the tendrils of dark energy began to fray. "Kyra!" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the escaping coolant. "Wake up! You have to fight it!" Her eyes snapped open, but they weren't silver anymore. They were filled with a dark, swirling void, the mark of Vara's corruption. She looked at me, but she didn't see Drex. She saw a target. "Drex, move," she whispered, her voice sounding like 1,000 dying stars. "I can't hold it." She didn't have to hold it. She had to break it. Vera recovered, her obsidian skin glowing with a murderous intensity. "You've ruined the calibration, you insignificant bug. But it doesn't matter. I don't need a perfect signal to kill you." She raised both hands, and the shadows in the room began to coalesce into a physical mass, a jagged obsidian spear aimed directly at my heart. I could see the ripples in the air as the psionic energy gathered, a force that could punch through a starship's hull. I looked at Vara, then at Kyra, who was struggling against the dark tendrils. I had 10 seconds of adrenaline left before my heart gave out. I had one shot. I didn't aim at Vara. I aimed at the phase shift regulator I'd installed in my tactical belt, the one we'd taken from the junkyard. It was a crude analog device, built to vibrate at a frequency that disrupted sensor nets. If I could overload it, it would create a localized burst of sensory noise that would shatter any psychic link in the room. It would also probably scramble my own brain into a pulp. "Drex, don't!" Kyra screamed, her silver eyes returning for a brief, terrified second. I looked at her and gave her the crookedest, most sarcastic smile I could manage. Sorry, princess. I told you I contained multitudes. I slammed the regulator's power cell into overdrive and held it against my chest. Then I pulled the trigger. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a scream. Not mine, but the universe's. A high-pitched, agonizing whine tore through the chamber, shattering the crystal viewing ports and turning the violet light of the amplifier into a blinding white flash. I felt my consciousness being pulled apart, my thoughts scattered like leaves in a hurricane. I saw images of Earth, of the Proxima Labs, of Kyra's emerald smile. Then there was only darkness. The silence was absolute. I woke up to the smell of ozone and the taste of blood in my mouth. My head felt like it had been used as a target for a heavy artillery exercise, and my vision was a blurry, desaturated mess. I was lying on my back, the cold floor of the chamber vibrating slightly beneath me. Rusty, I croaked, the word feeling like a jagged stone in my throat. Captain, the AI's voice responded, sounding remarkably stable. I have regained control of the ship's systems. The echo trap has been neutralized. I must say that was an exceptionally reckless maneuver. Your brain's neural activity currently resembles a bowl of lukewarm porridge. I'll take that as a compliment, I muttered, pushing myself up onto my elbows. The chamber was a ruin. The cooling pipes were still hissing, filling the room with a thick white fog. The black crystal heart of the amplifier was shattered, its jagged remains glowing with a dim, dying embers. Vera was gone. Whether she had been vaporized by the feedback or had fled into the shadows, I didn't know. But the dark pressure that had dominated the room was gone, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence. Kyra, I gasped, my heart stuttering in my chest. I saw her then. She was slumped at the base of the shattered amplifier, her black infiltration suit torn and covered in frost. Her skin was a pale, translucent gray, the bioluminescence almost entirely extinguished. I scrambled toward her, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly. Kyra, talk to me. Come on, princess. Don't go quiet on me now. I reached her and pulled her into my lap. Her skin was freezing, her breathing so shallow I could barely feel it. I checked her pulse, thready, erratic, and fading fast. The feedback from the regulator had broken the link, but the strain of being the conduit for the purge had nearly burned her out. I'm a doctor, I told myself, my hands shaking as I reached for my medical kit. I'm not a smuggler. I'm not a cannibal. I'm a goddamn doctor. I checked her pupils, blown and unresponsive. Her neural pathways were firing at random, a psychic seizure that was slowly liquefying her brain. I didn't have the equipment for this. I didn't have a med bay or a neural stabilizer. All I had was a bottle of water, a few stims, and my own blood. Factor X7. I looked at her, then at my own scarred forearm. 3 years ago, I had saved Alara and destroyed my life in the process. I had been judged, hunted, and hated for the very thing that made me a healer. I had spent 3 years running from the monster in the mirror, but as I looked at Kyra, I realized that the prejudice of the galaxy didn't matter. What mattered was the choice I was making right now. I won't let you die, I whispered. I took the medical scalpel from the kit and made a clean, deep incision across my palm. Then I reached into the wound Kyra had sustained from the dark energy tendrils, a jagged tear in her side. I pressed my bleeding palm directly against her open flesh, closing my eyes as the breath of life began. The exchange was violent. As my blood entered her system, the Factor X7 enzymes immediately locked onto the lingering psychic toxins. It felt like 1,000 needles were being driven into my arm. My vision turned white, and I felt her pain, her fear, and her memories flooding into me. I saw her childhood in the crystal spires. I saw the day her brother had told her she was a tool for the state. I saw the moment she had looked at me in the casino and felt the resonance of my hidden kindness. He isn't a monster, she thought in the memory. He's just lonely. The enzymes worked. The psychic seizure slowed, then stopped. I felt her heart find a steady rhythm, her body warming as the bioluminescence began to return, a soft, pulsating emerald glow that spread from her chest to her limbs. I slumped back, my head spinning. I was lightheaded from the blood loss and the neural feedback, but I didn't let go of her hand. Drex? Her voice was a faint, musical whisper. I opened my eyes. She was looking at me, her silver irises clear and bright. She looked at our joined hands, at the blood-stained floor, and then back at my face. "You did it again," she said, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "You gave me the breath." I couldn't help but snort. "Yeah, well, I'm a creature of habit, I guess." She sat up slowly, leaning against my shoulder. The emerald light of her skin was warm now, a comforting presence in the cold room. We sat there in the ruins of the amplifier, two impurities who had just saved the world. Below us, the sound of shouting and gunfire began to echo up from the council chambers. The security forces had finally realized that something was wrong. "We need to move," I said, though the thought of standing up felt like an impossible task. "The Obsidian guards are going to be here any second." Kyra stood up, her movements graceful despite her exhaustion. She reached down and offered me her hand. I took it, and for a second, the gold light of her skin flared, a warm, reassuring spark that traveled up my arm. "They're already here," she said, her eyes fixed on the entrance to the chamber. The door burst open, and a squad of Obsidian soldiers stormed in, their heavy pulse rifles leveled at us. But they weren't alone. Leading them was High Arbiter Vaxus, his silver skin flushed with rage. "Seize them!" he roared, gesturing toward us. "They've destroyed the amplifier. They've ruined everything." The soldiers hesitated. They looked at the shattered crystal, then at Kyra, who stood tall and defiant, her emerald skin glowing with a regal, blinding light. She didn't look like a victim or a refugee. She looked like a queen. "Arbiter Vaxus," she said, her voice echoing with the authority of her bloodline. "You speak of order and purity. But look at what your order has built. A machine designed to murder your own people. A conspiracy to turn the galaxy into a graveyard." "Lies!" Vaxus screamed, his hand moving toward his own blaster. "She's been corrupted by the human. She's no longer one of us." Kyra stepped forward, her silver eyes glowing with a psionic intensity that made the soldiers flinch. "I am exactly who I was meant to be, Vaxus. I am a Zehal, and I say that this purity is a poison." She turned to the soldiers, her voice dropping to a calm, steady resonance. "Look at the human beside me. You were told he was a monster. You were told his species was a plague. But he is the one who broke the machine. He is the one who risked his life to save a galaxy that hated him. Is that the action of a monster? Or is the monster the man who asked you to kill your neighbors to maintain his power?" The soldiers looked at each other, their grip on their rifles wavering. They had been raised on the rumors, fed the propaganda of the human consumer for years. But here, in the cold light of the ruined chamber, the lie was falling apart. "Don't listen to her," Vaxus yelled, drawing his weapon. Before he could fire, I was there. The adrenaline hadn't entirely worn off, and my instincts were still dialed to 11. I lunged at Vaxus, catching his wrist and twisting the blaster out of his hand. We went down in a heap of silk and silver skin, rolling across the floor. He was stronger than he looked, his cybernetic enhancements giving him a brutal, mechanical edge. He threw a punch that caught me in the jaw, sending stars dancing across my vision. "You filthy animal!" he hissed, his fingers clawing at my throat. I grabbed a jagged shard of the shattered amplifier crystal from the floor and pressed it against his neck. The black crystal pulsed with a faint, dying heat. "Give it a rest, Vaxus," I growled, my face inches from his. "Your symphony is over. The only thing people are going to hear now is the truth." He looked into my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see hatred. I saw fear. The pure, unadulterated fear of a man who realized that his neat little box had been shattered beyond repair. The soldiers didn't move. They stood in a circle around us, their rifles lowered. They were watching Kyra, who stood like a beacon in the center of the room. The High Chancellor entered the room then, flanked by his own security detail. He looked at the ruined machine, at the bleeding human on the floor, and at the glowing Aetherian princess. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his three eyes blinking in shock. The meaning, Chancellor, Kyra said, her voice clear and unwavering, is that the Biopurity Initiative is a fraud, and the man who proposed it is a traitor. For the next hour, the chamber was a whirlwind of activity. The Chancellor's team secured the room, and Kyra began the process of presenting the evidence Vara had inadvertently left behind. The data logs, the frequency settings, the list of impurities scheduled for deletion, it was all there. I sat on a crate, a medic from the Council's team patching up the cut on my hand. I watched as Vaxis was led away in psionic dampeners, his silver skin looking dull and defeated. I watched as Prince Kalen, Kyra's brother, was brought in, his face a mask of shame as he looked at his sister. "You okay?" I asked as Kyra finally stepped away from the council members and walked toward me. She sat down beside me on the crate, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline finally left her system. "I'm tired, Drex. I'm so very tired." "Yeah, I know the feeling," I said, offering her a sip of water from a canteen. "But you did it. You saved them." "We saved them," she corrected, her hand finding mine. We sat there for a long time watching the chaos of the cleanup. The shard of Orin was still a crystal dagger in the dark, but it didn't feel so sharp anymore. The rumors were still out there. The prejudice wouldn't vanish overnight. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was running. "Drex," she said, her voice a quiet whisper. "What happens now?" I looked out at the stars through the shattered viewing port. The Nightingale was waiting for us in the bay. The Echo Sisters, the real ones, the ones Vara had used, were still out there needing a leader. "Now," I said, leaning my head against hers, "we go find a planet that doesn't have a name for us yet, a place where we can just be messy and unpredictable and very, very alive." She smiled and the emerald light of her skin flared, a soft, beautiful glow that chased away the shadows of the chamber. "I'd like that," she said. I stood up, my joints popping in protest, and offered her my hand. She took it, and together, we walked out of the ruins of the perfect machine and into the beautiful, chaotic unknown. The galaxy was still a mess. But as I looked at the woman beside me, I realized that was exactly how it was supposed to be. Purity was a tomb. Life was the noise. And I'd never heard anything more beautiful in my life. The silence that followed the destruction of the amplifier was not the peaceful, mathematical quiet Vara had promised. It was the heavy, ringing silence of a world that had just looked into a mirror and found itself wanting. As the council guards systematically secured the perimeter of the shard, the violet glow that had defined the station for decades flickered and died, replaced by the stark, sterile white of emergency lighting. I sat on the floor, leaning against a dented conduit, watching the blood from my hand drip onto the white tiles. It was a deep, vibrant crimson, the color of life, messy and unapologetic. I was exhausted. My nervous system felt like it had been scrubbed with steel wool, but for the first time in 3 years, the weight on my chest wasn't just guilt. It was gravity, real, physical gravity. "Captain," the AI's voice chimed in my ear, remarkably crisp now that the dampening field had collapsed. "I have successfully transmitted the full data logs of the amplifier's calibration to the High Chancellor's private server. The hegemony's biopurity encryption has been neutralized. It is currently being broadcast across all major news feeds in 42 different languages." "Good work, Rusty," I whispered, closing my eyes for a second. "Spread the word. Let everyone know exactly what kind of purity they were being sold." "Drex?" Kyra was sitting a few feet away, her skin glowing with a soft, steady emerald light that seemed to chase away the lingering shadows of the room. She was looking at her brother, Prince Kalen, who stood trembling between 2 council guards. He looked smaller than I remembered, his regal robes torn and his silver skin ashen. "Why, Kalen?" she asked, her voice devoid of its former anger, replaced by a profound, echoing sadness. "Why would you give them the keys to our souls?" Kalen didn't look at her. He looked at the floor, his fingers twitching. "They were going to kill us anyway, Kyra. The hegemony. They had the numbers. They had the ships. I thought, if I made us useful, if I showed them we could provide the order they wanted, they would let us survive. I chose the lesser evil." Kyra stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over to him, her silver eyes searching his. You didn't choose the lesser evil, Kalen. You chose the easier path. You traded our freedom for a seat at a table that was built on graves. You saw a monster in the dark and decided to become its leash. Kalen finally looked up, his eyes wet with tears. And look at you. You're standing with a human, a creature that thrives on violence. He fed on you, Kyra. I saw the scanners. He saved me, Kalen, she said, her voice like a hammer on an anvil. He gave me his life because he chose to, not because a code told him to, and not because he wanted power. He broke the rules of his own survival to keep me breathing. That is something you and your pragmatism will never understand. She turned away from him, her posture every bit as regal as the princess she had once been, but there was a new hardness in her eyes, a strength that hadn't been there when we first met in the casino. She walked over to me and offered her hand. Let's go, Drex. I've seen enough of this place. I took her hand and pulled myself up. My joints groaned in protest, but the warmth of her resonance was like a shot of high-grade fuel. We walked past the guards, past the weeping prince, and out into the main corridor. The Shard was in a state of controlled chaos. Diplomats were shouting into their communicators. Security teams were rushing to secure the lower levels. And a crowd of representatives from dozens of species were huddled together, talking in hushed, urgent tones. They looked at us as we passed, a blood-stained human and a glowing Aetherian princess. The whispers didn't stop, but they were different now. I heard the word hero more than once. I heard people questioning the reports they'd seen on the news. The lie was dying, one whisper at a time. Wait. We turned to see Quatra, the four-armed Echo sister, pushing through the crowd. She looked like she'd been through a war zone. Her purple skin was covered in soot, and one of her lower arms was in a makeshift sling. But her amber eyes were bright with triumph. Vera, I asked. Gone, Quatra spat, all four of her eyes narrowing. She hit a manual escape pod the second the feedback looped. We're tracking her trajectory toward the outer rim, but she's a ghost. She'll be back, Drex. People like her don't just give up on fixing the universe. We'll be ready, I said, reaching out to shake her hand. All of them. Quatra laughed, a deep, weary sound. You damn well better be. The Appreciation Society is already growing. After tonight's broadcast, you're going to be the most famous man in the galaxy for all the right reasons. Try not to let it go to your head. It's already big enough. She winked and disappeared back into the crowd, her multiple arms waving to clear a path for a medical team. We reached the docking bay 42, where the Nightingale sat like a black shadow in the flickering lights. The ship looked undamaged, its stealth hull shimmering with a dull, matte finish. Captain, the AI greeted me as the ramp descended. I have performed a full system diagnostic. Aside from a slightly singed cooling array and a captain who appears to be 90% bruising, we are ready for departure. Let's get out of here, Rusty, I said, leaning against the hull. Set a course for the neutral territories, somewhere with a lot of sun and absolutely no ancient mind control devices. As the ship lifted off and banked away from the Shard of Orn, I looked out the viewport. The station was a massive, crystalline needle hanging in the blackness of space, its lights beginning to glow with a soft, natural white again. It no longer felt like a weapon. It felt like a monument to a mistake. Kyra was standing beside me, her reflection in the glass shimmering with a soft green light. She looked at the stars, then at me. You realize they're never going to stop looking for us, don't you? She said softly. The hegemony is shattered, but there will be others. Other people who want your blood, or my resonance, or just a story to tell. I know, I said, putting my arm around her shoulder, but let them look. We've spent enough time running from who we are. From now on, if they want to find us, they're going to have to look us in the eye. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, the silence was perfect. It wasn't the silence of the void or the silence of a purge. It was the silence of two people who had finally found home in the middle of a storm. 3 months had passed since the night the Shard of Orn went dark. We were sitting on a balcony on the planet Orn 2, a world of floating islands and eternal sunsets. The air was warm and smelled of salt and a local flower that bloomed only in the twilight. It was a peaceful place, far removed from the politics of the council and the shadow of the hegemony. The Nightingale was docked at a private pad nearby, its hull newly painted with a vibrant streak of crimson. My little tribute to the noise we had created. We had spent the last 90 days traveling through the Outer Rim, helping the Echo Sisters rebuild their network into something more than just a hiding place. We were becoming a bridge between species, a living proof that different frequencies could harmonize without a machine to force them. Kyra was reading a datapad, her emerald skin glowing softly in the fading light. She had officially resigned her diplomatic post, a move that had sent shockwaves through the Aetherian government, but she had never looked happier. She was no longer a puppet or a tool. She was a woman who made her own choices. The council sent another message, she said, not looking up from the screen. They've officially cleared your name in all 17 sectors. The Proxima incident is being reclassified as a specialized medical intervention. Sukkakunina, they even want to give you a medal for interspecies bravery. I snorted, taking a sip of the local amber-colored wine. A medal? I'd rather they just gave me a discount on fuel and a lifetime supply of decent Earth coffee. I'm not a hero, Kyra. I'm just a guy who got tired of being told he was a monster. She put the pad down and looked at me, her silver eyes shimmering with affection. That's exactly what a hero would say, Drex Vane. I stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony, looking out at the islands drifting across the purple sky. I could see the lights of a nearby village beginning to twinkle, a dozen different species living together in a beautiful, disorganized mess. I had changed. I could feel it in the way I breathed, in the way I looked at my own hands. For 3 years, I had walked through the galaxy with my shoulders hunched, waiting for someone to point a finger and scream. I had let their prejudice define me, let their fear become my own. I had been a ghost in my own life, but now I stood tall. I didn't hide my scars or the rough edges of my human nature. I had learned that being human wasn't about being pure or perfect. It was about the courage to be messy. It was about the choice to do the right thing when every instinct told you to run. I walked back into the room and found my old flight jacket, the one I'd worn at the casino. It was ragged and stained, but I put it on anyway. I reached into the pocket and pulled out a small metallic coin I'd picked up on Heliox 4. It was a child's toy, a simple spinning top. Kyra watched me as I set it on the table and gave it a flick. It wobbled and spun, its uneven weight making it dance in an unpredictable circle. Look at that, I said, pointing to the toy. Vera would have hated this. It's off balance. It's inefficient. It doesn't follow a perfect path, but it's beautiful because it's moving, because it's defying gravity in its own stubborn way. She stood up and walked over to me, her hand resting on my arm. Just like us. Just like us, I agreed. I thought about all the people we'd met on our journey, the terrified princess in the bathroom, the scarred scavengers on the junk world, the 4-armed warrior who fought for a dream. We were all impurities in someone's eyes. We were all monsters to someone who didn't understand our language or our heart. But as I looked at Kyra, I realized that the only real monsters in the galaxy were the ones who tried to take away our right to choose who we wanted to be. The ones who built walls out of words like pure and impure to hide their own fear of the unknown. For so long, I let the galaxy tell me who I was. I let a bad translation and a grainy video clip become my identity. I carried that anger like a shield, thinking it would protect me, but all it did was keep me alone. It took a woman who was terrified of me to show me the truth. It took a mission that should have killed us to make me realize that I am not my past, and I am certainly not their prejudice. Being human is a difficult, painful, and often exhausting endeavor, but it is the only thing worth doing. We are not defined by the blood in our veins or the light in our skin, but by the moments when we decide that someone else's life is more important than our own safety. We are the noise in the machine, the glitch in the system, and that is exactly where our power lies. I turned to Kyra and smiled, a real, genuine smile that didn't have a hint of sarcasm in it. Ready to go? I asked. Where to this time? I don't know, I said, pulling her close. Rusty says there's a distress signal coming from the Veiled Nebula. Something about a group of refugees who need a fast ship and a couple of people who aren't afraid of a little trouble. Kyra laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. Well then, we shouldn't keep them waiting. We walked out to the landing pad together, our shadows stretching long across the stone. The nightingale was waiting, its engines humming a low expectant tune. We weren't running from anything anymore. We were heading toward the next choice, the next mess, the next beautiful, unpredictable moment. I stopped at the top of the ramp and looked back at the setting suns one last time. I thought about everyone who was still hiding, everyone who was still being told they weren't enough, or that they were too much. I spent years believing that the world was a cold, logical place where monsters were real and heroes were just a lie. But I've learned that the line between the two is much thinner than we think. It's a line drawn by a single choice, a single breath, a single hand held out in the dark. I wonder what labels have others placed on you that you have started to believe. If you could strip away the stories they tell about you, what kind of choice would you make today? I stepped into the ship and the airlock hissed shut. We were the noise, and we were just getting started. The nightingale rose into the purple sky, a streak of black and crimson vanishing into the stars.